I think that it's not that people, don't want to forgive or don't want to move past a level of hurt, but I think that there are people who reserve themselves to forgive and to forget because they're actually afraid of losing what they feel is a part of them. A lot of times when we go through traumas and things like that, we kind of begin to identify with it because of how trauma affects us. And it affects us more so in ways that we don't even realize, that we can't even see up front. A lot of times we might have a trauma that happens, and then there's this moment of shock that we go through a lot of times. And when we come out of that shock, we think that we're processing normally. And a lot of times, a lot of the changes that we go through, other people can notice, but we can't. But we go through those changes and come out of that shock, and we continue life on, and we kind of build up our life around that thing without knowing it, because what we do is we build up our life, trying to be comfortable, trying to cope, essentially trying to avoid that trauma, and even avoid, actually dealing with that trauma. It's easier for us to try to avoid being hurt that way again or being traumatized that way again than it is for us to actually deal with the trauma. And so many of us go on in life, and when trauma happens at a young age, abandonment, rejection, rape, things like that happen at a young age. That's an entire life that most people live, an entire 20 to 30 years that most people go, kind of just suppressing whatever happened to them. And so, when it comes to the time where you come to that point where you're like, you know what, God, I'm ready to give this thing up. Like I'm ready to be okay. Like I'm ready to heal. And part of that healing is really releasing and giving up that thing. But a lot of people kind of wrestle with it. They kind of go back and forth with it, because it's like, well, God, if I give this up, if I forgive this matter, if I forget this matter, it's no longer important. It kind of feels like, well, you're taking away, what kind of would make me feel like, okay, someone actually would care. You take away all those things. And then not only that, it's like you're taking away a part of me. You're taking away what I know. And because, these traumas happen at such a young age, it's like all I've known, like all we know is that trauma and how we've built our lives around that trauma. And so, God, if you take away this thing, or if I have to actually give up this thing, if I have to actually give up this memory, or give up, and it's not even always that we're giving up a memory, because it's not that, when we forgive and forget, it's not even that we forget, or that we completely put it out of our minds and we never remember it again. But it's just that thing, whenever we do come across that memory, it's no longer, we forget the symptoms, or we forget the reactions. Our bodies will forget the reactions that we have. Our nerves will forget the reactions. And so those things will no longer come about. But I think that when people say, well, I can't forgive and forget this thing, or sometimes they'll say, well, I can forgive this, but I can't forget it. But even speaking that is still saying that you can't forgive it, because it's still saying that you can't get over it. But it's a lot of times that resistance just comes from people just not being ready to let go of that part of themselves, because that part of themselves is all they know. Many of us don't know ourselves aside from our trauma. Many of us don't know ourselves aside from the abandonment. Many of us don't know ourselves aside from the rejection, because we have not had the ability to see what we look like outside of our survival mode. Because literally in our trauma, literally in how we live after our trauma, it's a mode of survival. Anything that you do to cope, when you're trying to live and cope, you're trying to survive. And so anything outside of that trauma, anything outside of how we have dealt with that trauma, or tried to survive outside that trauma, it is new, and it is unusual, and it is uncomfortable, and it's scary. It's scary. So I don't think that it's that a lot of people don't want to forgive, that they don't want to move past the hurt and things. But I think that a lot of people are reluctant or reserved to actually let go and let God fully heal them, because they don't, they have to get to know a whole new person. They have to kind of walk into a whole new person, and have to walk in a way in the world that does not cover themselves from the world, but actually uncovers who they are. And the thing, when you're walking with God, you can't walk with God and be hidden. You can't walk with God and be, because we walk before God God. We walk before him and with him naked and unashamed. So we can't walk with him. We can't walk with him fully, or at least in his will, or walk in our entire purpose when we're holding on to this thing, that thing, and this thing is making up our identity, or in our mind that's telling us who we are. But our identity is in Christ. Okay, our identity is in Christ, and there's freedom in him. There's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There's no condemnation. There's no guilt, no shame, there's no abandonment in him. There's no rejection in him, because he doesn't reject us. He doesn't abandon us. He will never leave nor forsake us. He has redeemed us. You know what I'm saying? He's not in our trauma. He's not in our trauma. So, I think that in order for many of us to be able to effectively heal and effectively be able to move around, move from that, or move just to a place where you can forgive and you can forget, is we have to get to the point where we understand first that our identity is in Christ. It's not in this world, and it's not in our trauma. We are not, I always say that we are not our trauma. We are our testimony. Okay. We are not what happened to us. We are a testimony of how God's grace has kept us, has transformed us. It has brought us through even the suffering of that, and has brought us to realize who we are in him, which is greater. And then we begin to even understand how the enemy has had his hand in our trauma. And once you get to that point, listen, it's a whole different level of freedom. But I think that we all just have to get to that point. Many people just have to get to that point. And I think that would be that would be groundbreaking for a lot of people who are looking for their healing, looking for deliverance right now, and feeling like, I want to forgive, but I just can't let this go. I can't let this go. And I would say to those people that if you really want to know who you truly are, if you really want to walk in your true identity, you have to come away from that, because you have to come away from who trauma is telling you that you are, or who trauma and the world and society and social culture and all that and self-care and all of this is telling you that you have to be, because you can be free from all of that.